Hello and welcome everybody. We'll get started here shortly. Welcome, welcome. You're in the right spot. Okay, fantastic. People still coming in, but it is the top of the hour, so we'll kick this off. My name is Alan Barr with COEH Northern California, and on behalf of the NIOSH-supported education and research centers throughout the country, we're pleased to bring you the first installment of the 2025 ERC Ergonomics webinar series. So Happy New Year. Where we offer free monthly webinars on various topics on human factors and ergonomics. This collaborative effort on behalf of each ERC's continuing education program aspires to provide access to current research supported through NIOSH ERC programs. Thanks again for joining us today. If you're logged in via your registration email, you will receive a link to an evaluation form that will qualify you for a certificate of completion worth one continuing education contact hour. Please consider joining us for the next ERC ergonomics webinar in our series, and that'll be on March 19th, 2025, machine learning and natural language processing applications in injury surveillance and prevention. You can register for that and other upcoming webinars at coeh.berkeley.edu/webinars. For today's webinar, you'll be muted during the presentation, but we do encourage you to ask questions. Just enter it into the online Q&A, and we'll save some time at the end of the presentation to address those questions if we have time. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be made available along with past webinars on the COEH Northern California YouTube channel. Please take a moment to like and subscribe to our channel to help us continue to grow it. Today's webinar title is the California Janitor Workload Study, a time and physical risk assessment of common janitorial tasks. And this will be presented by my colleague and friend, Melissa Afterman. Melissa is a board-certified professional ergonomist with over 20 years of consulting practice in industrial, laboratory, and office ergonomics. She's the head of professional development and a researcher with the University of California Ergonomics Research Lab and Graduate Training Program. She's also an instructor in the COEH Online Ergonomics Certificate Program. Melissa earned her master's in Human Factors and Ergonomics Engineering at San Jose State University and her undergraduate degree in Agricultural Engineering from Cal Poly State University in San Luis Obispo. With that, it's my pleasure to hand it over to Melissa.
Welcome, Melissa. Thank you, Alan. Thank you. And welcome, everyone. I'm pleased that you're interested in this topic. This is a topic that we've been working on in the lab actually since 2021. So I'm delighted to be sharing some of the results from the study with you today. This project is supported by the NIOSH training grant, also the California Commission on Health and Safety and Workers' Compensation, which is part of the California Department of Industrial Relations, the Service Employees International Union, and the Maintenance Cooperation Trust Fund. And just to disclose that our ergonomics research lab is also supported by the companies and government organizations that you see shown here. Janitors, they're essential workers that are employed as caretakers of the public spaces that we utilize every day. They perform physically demanding work that requires gripping and reaching, lifting and forward bending, moving heavy equipment, and prolonged standing, all of which can result in low back pain and other musculoskeletal disorders. It's a large industry. In the US, there's estimated 2.3 million janitors working in the country and over 200,000 employed in California alone. This industry is ranked third for non-fatal injuries and illnesses with lost work days, with injury rates almost 3 times higher than all other occupations combined. As part of this study, I won't be going into the details of the survey results today, but we surveyed 416 California janitors, and of that group, nearly 85% reported moderate to severe pain over the prior month in at least one body region. So that begs the question, why? Why the high pain prevalence? And so we know that work pace, work risk, and work organization may all contribute to that high pain prevalence, meaning work pace would representing the time allocated to tasks. So whereas insufficient time might lead to increased risk or contribute to this pain. Same with work organization, how tasks are combined into jobs that janitors do. Depending on the elements of those tasks and the time allocated to those tasks, that could contribute to this pain prevalence. And just the risks of the work itself, so the musculoskeletal risks. So it's this area in the very middle of this overlap, though, that we're particularly interested in or concerned with, where tasks may have underestimated time allocated to them, and there may be a high risk of musculoskeletal disorder. And this is really going, as you'll see, the focus of the study that we are sharing, the analysis that we're sharing with you today, the area where these all overlap. Now, we aren't the first to do a study like this. In the last few years, the state of Washington has conducted a study of janitor workload as well. They looked at office workspace janitors and office workspace venue. They conducted a time study and a musculoskeletal disorder risk assessment. And their results helped develop a draft of a workload calculator that companies and managers might use when scheduling or planning staffing for janitorial work. So if you're interested in what they have done, there is actually another webinar from this ERC webinar series that is available on the YouTube channel for the COEH YouTube channel, and they have some reports published on the SHARP website as well for the state of Washington. So you can look that up if that's interest to you. But what I'd like to talk to you now about is the California Janitor Workload Study that we have recently kind of wrapping up after several years of good work. This study is led by researchers from the Northern California Center for Occupational Environmental Health, specifically Dr. Carissa Harris from the ergonomics program, Laura Stock from the Labor and Occupational Health program, and Dr. Fadi Fatala from the Agricultural and Safety Health program out of UC Davis. The researchers from the University of California campuses that participated directly in the risk assessment and time study analysis that I'll be sharing today are shown here. Includes myself, Jian Chen, Matthew Zhang, Alan Barr, and Carissa Harris. And our objectives for today are these three things that cover the time study and the risk assessment elements of this whole overall workload study. So we'll describe differences in actual work time and the times predicted with industry standard cleaning guidelines for different tasks in 3 different work venues. We'll identify biomechanical exposures and describe the risk of upper extremity and low back injuries. And we'll discuss the application of these findings to workload scheduling for janitors. The janitors that we included in this study were worked for companies that were members of the SEIU union. And they were included in recruitment if they had worked as a janitor for at least 6 months, were at least 18 years old, had no current severe pain or workers' comp claim, and were not in a managerial role. So if they were actually, performing cleaning tasks as a regular part of their job, they were included in recruitment. We looked at companies that cleaned 3 different types of venues: a shopping mall venue, event center or convention center venue, and airport venue. And all of the stakeholders that are involved in the janitorial work were included in preparation for this study. So we did a lot of presentations and prep work with the union representatives, the the cleaning companies that that building owners may contract with, and then the building owners that we needed to request access from to to come in to do the work, and then of course the employees or the janitors themselves. So we really took into consideration all of these key stakeholders in preparing for this study. Office venue was intended to be part of the study, but that was dropped due to scheduling challenges that we couldn't overcome. So when we collected data on site at these different venues, we took video of normal cleaning tasks of different janitors for up to 4 hours so that we could capture a representative sample of their tasks and work cycles, so we could see tasks repeated at least 3 times. They were instructed to work at their normal work pace. We captured natural rest breaks during the videotaping, and we really only stopped the camera during scheduled breaks like lunch break. We used a GoPro camera recorded at 30 with video recorded at 30 frames per second. And in addition to the video, we kept a written log of times and tasks so we could refer back if we needed to, if the video wasn't clear what was happening, but we had a backup log of what the janitor was doing when tasks and breaks were started and ended. These are a couple pictures of what the data collection looked like when we were on site. So you can see the researcher with holding the GoPro camera, following the janitor at a pretty, close enough pace to keep them in frame the whole time. In addition to the video, we took direct measurements that we would then use, direct measurements of the exposures that we could use in the ergonomic risk assessment tools. So we measured items that were lifted, we measured distances that were walked or carried. We measured reach distances, so reaching with the arms, push-pull forces of carts or other items that were moved via pushing, grip forces for different tools or equipment, and we counted the number of fixtures in a given space. Fixtures meaning like chairs or tables or toilets or sinks. So all of that video was then analyzed using MVTA, multi-video task analysis. The video segments that we had, if there were multiple segments, we combined them into one long 4-hour video. And we added placeholders for lunch breaks or any other non-recorded breaks. So we had one continuous segment of video for the whole 4-hour sample. With MVTA, we allocated every frame. So remember 30 frames per second of 4 hours, we allocated every single frame of that video to a particular category so that we could have very accurate time data of what the janitor was doing and where. So there was a category for workspace. So workspace would be something like restroom or common space or elevator. And there was a category or record for task type, things like disinfecting or scrubbing, trashing, resupply, things like that. If you've not worked with MVTA before, this is a screenshot of what the system looks like. And so you see that we have, for the space category or the space analysis, we have choices on the right where it says events. Is it the bathroom? Is it the kitchen? Is it the common space, the hallway, outside, etc.? And the colorful ribbons that you see along the top of the screenshot, that's a condensed version of all of the frames being allocated to one of those spaces. So that's how MVTA works. And then we had a similar assessment for task. So one of those colorful bars represents space and one of those colorful bars represents task. And you see some of the different tasks there listed out. Some of the venues that we had different spaces and tasks that were venue specific. For instance, at the event center, they folded tablecloths, and that was not something that they did at either of the other venues. So we had to add some venue specific events. Once we had completed the video analysis, we exported that data for from the MBTA so that we had exact durations of each task space combination. So we had a task space combination, which I'll refer to repeatedly throughout this talk, would be something like bathroom and scrubbing, or common space and trashing. So we have all these combinations of the tasks and the spaces. The data that came out of MBTA represents the actual or the measured time that for each particular cleaning task that we would then compare to the estimated or the allocated time from the ISSA standards. What are the ISSA standards, you might be wondering? Well, ISSA stands for International Sanitary Supply Association, and this is an industry organization for janitorial work, and this booklet itself is full of time estimates for different cleaning tasks and some different cleaning spaces. And this is a widely used tool for scheduling work or planning staffing for janitorial companies. So for our project, our study, we calculated ISSA times using this handbook for any of the space task durations that were over 5% of the total video time. In the ISSA, the time estimates are based on different types of units. So they may be based on how many fixtures are in an area or how many items are cleaned or worked with. Or sometimes it's per square linear footage is the unit that's used to find the estimated time. This is just an example of a screenshot of one of the pages in ISSA handbook, and you see it's organized by the task. So this is floor care with manual sweeping, and you choose what tool is used. This is angled broom, and then you further choose the tool size for 12 inches. And then you have a time estimate of the production rate, as they call it, or time estimate, which is the number of square foot per hour. You see the unit down here. So we use these and the actual units we measured. So how many square foot did they actually sweep in the particular video that we were analyzing? And we were able to calculate an estimated time of what would have been allocated or estimated by ISSA for a particular task. Mostly we use ISSA categories that were task-based, so like mopping or trashing or sweeping, like we just saw in the last slide. However, for bathroom cleaning, there is a category that's called all bathroom, and that's a space-based category that we use. That was the only space-based category that we used, just because it was easier to put those together, because ISSA had already done so. That included trashing, disinfecting, and floor care all in the bathrooms. So when you do that type of method with ISSA, it's by fixture. So how many toilets, how many sinks, how many urinals, you add all of those fixtures, and that's how you determine the production rate for a particular bathroom or the estimated time for a bathroom. There are different rates in ISSA for day and night, or it's really light duty and deep cleaning, and so we utilize those based on the time of day for the different samples. If we didn't have it measured directly, we took square footage, and we were able to estimate square footage in areas using venues floor plans. So we requested those from the building owners, and we were able to map the janitor's walking path from the video and then estimate square footage that was covered or cleaned. Linear footage, again, if we have it measured, we estimated that using the number of steps from the video, janitor's footsteps, and multiplied that by a stride length associated with their height. Definitely had some limitations in applying the ISSA time in determining estimated times. Some tasks that we observed weren't even listed in the ISSA. For example, furniture moving, we observed quite a bit, and it wasn't listed as a task. So we combined it with the other task that it was perhaps associated with. So wet mopping, we included furniture moving with wet mopping if you had to move a chair to mop on that floor surface under the chair. Transporting and moving a supply cart. There's not a category for that. So we just added that to the overall walking time, which we estimated using a slow pace according to the ISSA. So once we had the ISSA times, the estimated times, we could then compare those to the actual times that we got from our video analysis. We calculated percent deviation between the two, and also a difference in number of minutes between the two. We further normalized those differences to an 8-hour work shift to assess the potential discrepancy across the whole work shift. We took those results and organized them into two groups where we had samples where the actual time was less than the ISSA time, meaning ISSA had overestimated, and then the other side of that where the ISSA underestimated because actual time was actually greater. Actual time was actually greater than ISSA time. So this is an example of part of the spreadsheet that we use to calculate these. So we had by space and task, so cafe and disinfecting, and we have the ISSA production rate from the handbook, which gives us a number of minutes based on the actual measured units that we had in the space. And then that we knew the actual time from MBTA. So this is, we have our ISSA time, we have our measured time, and we can compare those to understand the difference between the two in minutes, but also this ratio of ISSA to actual, and a percent deviation between actual and ISSA. And this is a method that the Washington State team used as well. So we followed that method. And then we further just, for easy access to the results, we label them as faster or slower in terms of the work pace. Okay, so we had a total of 24 subjects in this time study and risk assessment. The 21 of those 24 completed the workload survey that I kind of mentioned at the very beginning. The 3 that didn't, we just had some scheduling conflicts and weren't able to get the surveys completed. But you see the demographic results of the 21 that we did have the survey response for. Kind of a pretty good split, 11 males and 9 females. Average tenure as a janitor was close to 23 years. The average age was between 50 and 65. And you can see the breakdown, mainly Hispanic, with other race and ethnicities represented, as you see. Janitors spent their time in different spaces and doing different tasks in different proportions depending on the venues that we saw. So for the mall, most of the time was spent cleaning common spaces, bathrooms, and cafeteria. And when I say cafeteria, that's an area that encompasses food courts as well as kitchens. So the cafeteria, you can, if you're at the mall, you can think of the food court. They mainly spent their time doing transporting, trashing. Transporting means moving some kind of items back and forth. So pushing a trash cart is a good example of transport in this case. Trashing is actually changing trash cans out or trash bags and then wiping. And the difference between wiping and disinfecting and scrubbing in terms of how we defined it was wiping was just with a cloth, where disinfecting and scrubbing utilized a spray bottle or some kind of solution. So the wiping was perhaps more in a little bit higher effort involved to wipe up the solution. In the airport, the mostly spent time cleaning common spaces again, bathrooms again, and cafeteria or food court again. The main tasks in the airport were trashing, disinfecting, and transport. So not, kind of similar to the mall, but when we looked at the event center, the main time spent cleaning different spaces and tasks was a little different. They spent most time in common spaces, outdoors, and in a janitorial warehouse area where large quantities of supplies were maintained. They did the top 3 tasks were washing windows, moving furniture, and vacuum cleaning. So this is now looking at the comparison of the actual times to the ISSA times. So, and like I mentioned, we categorized the differences into worker pace being faster or ISSA underestimating versus on the right here where the observed work is greater than the ISSA or the work pace was slower than, right? So that the actual time was less than what was estimated by ISSA. So there was, we saw results kind of on both sides of the fence here. The two trends that popped out were with transport and walking, which were more often underestimated by ISSA. And then on the other side of that was trashing, where the ISSA was more commonly overestimating the time needed to complete those tasks. And when we group the results by workspace, so we took and combined all the tasks that happen in a particular workspace, we saw, really not a lot of clear trends except for the outdoor workspace, where it was most often overestimated. Time was most often overestimated by ISSA, which makes sense because the tasks that were happening mostly outdoors were trashing and street washing, and those were both overestimated by the ISSA estimates or guidelines. Now, it's important to remember that these differences to the allocation times, they could affect the janitors disproportionately based on the tasks they're actually performing as part of their job, meaning how, when we combine everything together that one janitor does, we may have differences across jobs or across janitor assignments. So when we combined the overestimates and the underestimates by worker, and then normalized those differences for 7.5 hours of work, we saw the impact vary by venue. For the mall, we saw that for 4 of the 7 workers, the times were underestimated, up to 225 minutes per shift. Similarly, for the airport, 1 of the 3 workers was underestimated for up to 11 minutes per shift. And at the event center, the majority, 8 of 13, were underestimated for up to 189 minutes per shift. So meaning that if the ISSA were applied, they would not allow for enough time to complete the work. So just to summarize the results of that time study piece, the accuracy of the time study estimates varied widely by workspace and by work task and across venues. Most of the top 10 common tasks by duration did not exhibit a clear trend. Some of the tasks did not have a corresponding category in the ISSA handbook, which made a direct comparison impossible. And interpretation and application of the standards led to some challenges with accurately predicting cleaning times on some tasks. For instance, we assumed that ISSA accounts for cleaning all fixtures in a space, meaning if you're cleaning a bathroom and you calculate your estimated time to clean the bathroom by the number of fixtures in that space, we included every single fixture, every toilet, every urinal, every sink. But the janitor may not have cleaned every single urinal, toilet, and sink because of occupancy at that time of day. Same thing goes in the food courts, where we counted every single table because they would have been assigned to clean every single table, but if some people were sitting at tables, which they were, customers sitting at tables, those couldn't be cleaned at that time. And so this method may lead to a potential overestimation by the ISSA. It was unclear if the ISSA times account for prep time for certain tasks. We went ahead and included that prep time in the task. So for instance, if they were cleaning a kitchen and they needed to walk back and forth to the cleaning cart to get another sponge or get a dry towel, we included that walking time back and forth from the cleaning cart in the the task, the scrubbing task, for instance, or wrapping the vacuum cord we included in vacuuming. We assumed that was the intention, but if it wasn't, that could be a potential underestimation of time. And then I think I mentioned this, but there were some event center specific tasks that were not included in the ISSA at all, which really was challenging to evaluate the time allocations for that venue. I will say that the latest edition of ISSA, which is they're on the 8th edition, and I think it's 2023, so it's very recent, does include a lot of venue specific sections or categories. So there's sections for dormitories, hotels, correctional facilities, and so those are really helpful, I think, for when there's specific venue type tasks and spaces that need to be cleaned. Event center or convention center is not listed in there yet, but that could have helped that area if we had those covered. So, speaking of suggestions for ISSA, improvements or next iterations, I think we found that it would be helpful if there were some more details about the specific cleaning techniques that were used when those standard times, those published times, were calculated. We found that we were making a number of assumptions, and we weren't exactly sure how certain times were calculated by ISSA. And so I think it would be helpful if we knew that, and there was some, supplemental material that could explain that. And we think that it would be helpful to take into consideration space usage or percent occupancy of a space. Really, in our observations, found that changed the amount of time that was spent cleaning a certain space. How many people, how many customers, how many folks at the airport, passengers were in a space at a current time changed the time that it took to clean. And then, like I mentioned, adding a section or for event or convention center tasks would be a helpful suggestion, since there are other types of venues listed specifically. There were the tasks that we saw at the event center that was not included in ISSA was transporting and setting up furniture, working in a supply warehouse type area, and then folding tablecloths. So when we think about how to apply this time study results to work scheduling in practice, ISSA works on that for you, or they have a whole section devoted to that in their handbook, and they call it workloading. They call it which they say is analyzing work environments and processes to determine staffing levels for a task. So the problem, or the potential problem, is that that workloading determination is really based just on the standard times, which, as we've seen, both have been under and overestimated by the cleaning times, or the cleaning times have been the ISSA times have both under and overestimated what time would be needed based on the actual times that we measured. So this could be problematic. And the other big piece is that we need to consider the ergonomic risk that it's associated with each task. And so that part isn't really addressed, but it is what leads me to the next part of our talk here. So we did a risk assessment on all of the task space combinations that we saw. And so we're able to sort of add some of that in our approach to looking at the time study. We assessed the task space combinations for both the risk of upper extremity and low back pain or low back injury. So for upper extremity, we used the validated tool, the ACGIH hand activity threshold limit value. We use that for upper extremity work, and for the lower back, we use the revised NIOSH lift equation when work involved lifting. And when work involved pushing and pulling, we use the Ohio Bureau of Workers' Compensation guidelines. Now, I will not be going into the details of the lower back analysis, just in the interest of our limited time here today. I will summarize the results so you can get a sneak peek on that, but we're going to spend the majority of this time talking about the upper extremity analysis, mainly because that's where we saw the bigger risks. And so that has a bigger impact on the conclusions that we're making. If you're not familiar with this risk assessment tool, the inputs for the ACJH hand activity TLV are two things. There is the hand activity level, which is derived from time-based measures that we determined from our video analysis results. So we were able to determine the frequency or repetition rate, and then the duty cycle, which duty cycle is basically the percent of time that the hand is exerting force. And those two time-based measures determine the hand activity level, or the HAL. And then the other input into this risk assessment tool is what's called NPF, normalized peak force. And this is the force or of the exertion that the hand is doing while it's doing that repetitive work, or the peak force. And that for the purpose of this study, we used a consensus-based observer-rated NPF on a scale, on a 1 to 10 scale. To interpret the finding or the results of this risk assessment tool, we have the PFI, or peak force index, TLV, as a threshold of 1.0. Anything under 1.0 or equal to 1.0 is acceptable, meaning anything over, any PFI TLV over 1 would indicate a high risk. So in order to do this assessment, we needed to go back to MBTA and do another round of MBTA, but this time for the hand exertions themselves. So we, in MBTA, we allocated each frame again to 2 different categories to understand the frequency and the duration of each hand exertion. We categorized the type of tool and the type of hand exertion that was being performed. We, again, focus on the dominant hand here, unless we could see from the video that the non-dominant hand was performing the exertion for the entire length of the analysis, in which case we would use that hand. So here we are back in MBTA again, and this is now showing the analysis, an example of analysis for exertion, and you can see the different types of exertions that might have been chosen or allocated, I should say, per frame in the video. So gripping a handle, that might be a mop or a broom or a vacuum handle, pinching a cord, like a vacuum cord, squeezing a trigger or pulling a trigger on a spray bottle, scrubbing or pushing a rag, or pinching a carpet. And part of MBTA, you allocate frames to the actual exertion, but you also allocate frames to no exertion, so that you can, again, understand the duty cycle, which is the time working versus the time not working. So we included all tasks in this video analysis that involved upper extremity work, repetitive upper extremity work. There were 5 minutes of each task space combination analyzed per subject. And the exertion frequency and duration information, so the repetition type information, for each task space and exertion combination was exported from MBTA. So when I say task space exertion combination, I mean like these examples here. We had exertion frequency and duration for bathroom, disinfecting, squeezing trigger, or common space, mopping, gripping handle. So it really breaks it down into those categories. All right, so we ended up with 81 5-minute video segments of those different task space segments, which were contributed by 19 subjects that covered 11 different tasks. So this involved repetitive upper extremity work associated with wet mopping, dust mopping, sweeping, disinfecting or scrubbing, or vacuuming. All of those were observed at all 3 venues. Dusting was a task that we saw just at the airport, or that we observed just at the airport. Wiping and rug moving were specific at the mall, and washing windows was specific at the event center. But all of these different 11 tasks were included in the upper extremity analysis. And when we combined the results for all venues together and summarized them by task, we found that 9 of the 11 tasks had average PFI TLV scores greater than 1.0, which you'll remember is the threshold that we use to indicate or interpret a high risk level. So you see the tasks here that have a mean PFI TLV greater than 1. So it's all of them except sweeping and dusting. Now, when we combined all of the tasks that happen in a specific space and organized the findings by space, we found that all of the spaces had a PFI TLV score greater than 1. Now, I mentioned that I would give you a little sneak peek on the summary of the findings for the manual material handling assessment or the low back assessment. We found that 1 of 3 lifting tasks had an average CLI greater than 1.5. CLI is a composite lift index. 1.5 is a threshold that is commonly used for anything higher than 1.5 would be unacceptable or high risk. That task was trashing. And the results for trashing, or the risk of lifting associated with trashing, they varied by venue. Now with push and pull, all but 1 of the tasks that was assessed was found to be safe for at least 80% of the population. The 1 task that was that had a percent capable less than 80% was moving furniture, and if you're interested in more of the details on this part of the analysis, they will be forthcoming in the report that I mentioned at the beginning of the hour. So let's talk about the results for the upper extremity risk assessment and what we do with those. Anything with a PFI TLV greater than 1, as mentioned, indicates a high risk. And interventions should be made. So in some way to mitigate risk or lower risk needs to be investigated and implemented if a PFI TLV is greater than 1. This graph that you see on the right, this chart is a illustration of the 2 components that comprise the PFI TLV. And it's important to look at both of them because if there are ways that we can figure out how to reduce the overall risk. So along the x-axis here, we have the hand activity level, and on the y-axis, we have the normalized peak force. So anything you find, so that the way you can use this graphically is you find the hand activity level and along the x, and then you go up to the point on the y-axis where your normalized peak force is, and you find out where that intersection is. If it's above the big red line, PFI TLV is greater than 1. So what we can do to move the dot down or the point in space down on this graph is to either reduce the normalized peak force, so bring us down on the y-axis, or bring us down on the x-axis by reducing the hand activity level. So what that means in very clear speak is we need to either reduce the force or we need to reduce the frequency or the duty cycle. Now, if we can't reduce the force of the task, then we need to think about that duty cycle, adding additional recovery time so that we can reduce the HAL if that force can't be reduced. So with that said, we can look more closely at the components of the PFI TLV scores that exceeded 1. Right? So if we look at the tasks, the tasks that are listed on the left that have PFI TLV greater than 1, and we have now listed out the average hand activity level or HAL and the average NPF or normalized peak force. So we can see that the average normalized peak force for all of them is greater than 5. Which just means if we looked at the 5 on the x-axis here, that means that anything along that line is what we're talking about. So if the normalized peak, excuse me, I went the wrong way. You're looking at the normalized peak force on the y-axis here. So we're already pretty high up to that solid line. So if we're talking about forces that are up in this area here, so it's no wonder that many of them have the PFI TLVs that are greater than 1, especially the two tasks, the street washing and the cleaning escalator, that have high hand activity levels, great, 4 and 5. So they're out here in this red zone. But there's a lot of room for opportunity for reducing forces based on the NPFs that we have, that we see here. So when we think about solutions or interventions, the first thing we think about is reducing those forces. So how can we do that? I just want to offer a few suggestions here. This is not an exhaustive list of recommendations, but we're thinking about how to reduce force, hand exertion force. So for disinfecting and scrubbing, for example, using lower force squeeze bottles, or different types of bottles that distribute disinfecting solution could be an intervention. Using different methods or different tools that just reduce the force needed to clean a surface. Washing windows is another task that had a high and normalized peak force, so we could think about alternative methods or different tools that could be used, or maybe even repositioning the body so that the hand force doesn't require as much force from the hand. So I also just want to put a plug in here for if you are a company or you are working with janitors and you're looking for solutions, us ergonomists can come up with a list and we can come up with a lot of ideas, but often the best ideas come from the workers themselves. And so having a participatory approach to solving these problems is always advised. And so if we're identifying tasks that have high peak forces, it's always a good idea to include the workers in solving that and brainstorming ideas of how to reduce those forces. So just put in a plug-in for that because it's always a good approach. Now, for some of the tasks that we saw, like street washing and the cleaning of the escalator, they had both high hand exertion forces and high hand activity levels. So we kind of need to work on both aspects of that to bring down the risk score. So we need to investigate forces required to use specialized equipment. So both these two tasks are interesting. It's interesting that they both come up in this category because they both use motorized equipment that's specialized for this task. And so there may be some investigation of the forces that's required to use those tools. Maybe there's different tools, maybe there's modifications to those tools that could be done to reduce forces, and maybe there's different techniques or for reducing the exertion frequency and duty cycle, or work scheduling may need to be adjusted. All right, so speaking of work scheduling, when we can think about this in different ways in terms of different approaches to scheduling work, but when we think about it by cleaning task, we can think about combining tasks with various levels of risk that could benefit janitors by allowing for active recovery during work time. Alternating between trashing and wiping tables, for example, one being a lifting task and one being an upper extremity task, might provide recovery time. Recovery time for the low back during wiping tables and for the hands during lifting of trash bags. That's one way to use these results. Another would be to alternate between wet mopping, which had a higher PFI TLV, and dusting, which had a lower PFI TLV. So different ways we can think about work scheduling by task. But really what we should be doing is thinking about the combination of the allocated time and the risk assessment and how those combine together for work scheduling and the implications of that. So what we're showing here is the tasks that were assessed with the ISSA time study and a summary of the findings of that ISSA time study or the time study. So if it says ISSA low, that means ISSA underestimated the work time. And then a summary of the risk for upper extremity. UE means upper extremity, so that PFI TLV. So we see, there's 4 tasks on here: disinfecting, washing windows, wiping, and vacuuming, that all have high risk and had low ISSA, meaning an underestimation of time. And so that combination is of particular interest and concern when we're thinking about work scheduling. The transport had a moderate push risk, but also an underestimated of time, so that might be also fall into that category. Tasks that are time constrained and involve higher ergonomic risk may increase the likelihood of injury and pain for workers. And so we need to have additional time should be considered for those types of tasks to allow for adequate recovery during the work shift. So again, that's that space in the middle of this Venn diagram. That's really, you know, we really want to make sure we're focusing on that area. So, you know, thinking about that ISSA and how we could use this widely accepted and utilized tool, maybe make it a little bit better. The ISSA could include risk scores for each task. There could be an extra column in the handbook that not only tells you production times, but it also tells you estimated risk, or even just the body region that's affected by it. You could, you know, normalize risk scores to a scale from 0 to 5. There's different ways that you could set this up, but it would give the companies, the folks that are using the ISSA guidelines, more information to better inform the decisions that they make for work scheduling. And then the last thing I'll say is that we found real differences by venue. There was different techniques used at different venues, different tools used at different venues, and this just needs to be taken into consideration when work is being scheduled. This is an area that we're continuing to look at in our lab, and so yeah, this is just something to leave with you. That and ISSA, I think, there's something there, because I mentioned they already have different sections for different venues, but it's something that definitely needs a little bit more time to think about. So thank you. I just want to thank all of the janitors that participated in this study. We spent a lot of time with them, and they shared a lot of you know, their time with us. And it was you know, we couldn't have done it without them. We couldn't have done it without the support of SEIU and MCTF. So thank you to all of them, and thank you to all of you for being here. If you want more information, particularly about our study, there was one other webinar that we did last year that was more focused on the survey data, that was looking at the impact of precarious work and psychosocial stress on physical and mental health. And like I said a couple times, there will be the final report coming out soon that will include all of the findings from not only the time motion study, but also the survey that I mentioned, and the important focus group that LOHP conducted as well. So thank you very much. I think we have questions, huh, Alan?
Yeah, yes, ma'am. Thank you very much, Melissa, for that excellent presentation. And we do have some questions coming in. Please feel free to type your question into the Q&A box. So this first one is as much a comment as it is a question, but the learner would love to know how these results would differ for UC custodial staff.
Well, I think I'd like to know that too. You know, theoretically, they would, I mean, it's going to be, like I said, based on venue, based on work task, based on workspace, but we should see some similarities. And so, you know, the more data that we can collect and analyze, the more we can broaden that data set and see. But, you know, the thing that we've learned is that janitors do similar, I mean, they're similar cleaning work looks a lot the same for many spaces and many tasks. Again, there are some specialized areas, but if we're talking about bathrooms and common spaces and offices, I would imagine that the results would look similar. But, you know, we would love to know more.
Okay, we've got a few more coming in here. Somebody says, I wonder about if or how you controlled for worker pace. For example, some workers may work slower or faster depending on the worker and their perceptions of the study, just because they're on camera, for example. Also, if workers were coached by the union, their particular union, to work slower, this may impact the findings.
Yeah, you know, those are all valid points. We, of course, instructed them at the beginning of the video recording to work at their normal pace, pretend like we're not here, all the normal instructions that we would give. But I think really what happens is after a certain amount of minutes and hours, they really kind of forget that you're there. And so it evens itself out over the time, which is why we spend so much time and why we make sure we get three, at least 3 cycles of each task so that we're getting a more representative sample. But yeah, I mean, I got to say, just from personal experience as being one of the data collectors, they really, it did get to a point in almost every recording where they kind of just tuned us out and we were just part of the furniture at that point. So I think that having that long exposure or that long data collection period helped to normalize that.
Thank you. Why did you decide to use RNLE for lower back in your risk assessment instead of a less conservative risk assessment analysis?
We chose RNLE and the ACGIH TLD for hand activity because of their the validation studies that have been done, and the fact that they are some of the most commonly used tools in for risk assessment for ergonomics. So yeah, that's what we
Great.
used.
Great. Were any forces measured, or were all force ratings based on researcher observations and estimates?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we did measure some forces for certain tasks and on certain subjects. We ended up going with the consensus-based observer approach because we just didn't have quite enough across the board with that. So that, we actually kind of compared what we had, what our observer rated were to the actual, and that informed if we were having a hard time coming to a consensus. So we took that into consideration, but it really was just a necessity based on the data that we had collected.
Okay, thank you, Melissa. This one I don't quite understand, but perhaps you will. Do you know if ISSA study has data to clean apartments that has been neglected? Perhaps there should be a period there that has been neglected between 2 to 5 years. You see that
I
one?
think I know what you're asking there. I think you're trying to figure out ISSA standards for like deep cleaning of an apartment. Um, there is housing and dormitory section. I don't know. I mean, I don't believe they get into the specifics of how long it's been neglected, meaning how deep the cleaning needs to be. But there is a section for that. But I think that you can get creative with what is in ISSA and and get to some pretty decent estimates, categories wise, even if there's not something specific.
Okay, learners curious about PFI estimation across researchers and how that was, quote, calibrated between each person rating the PFI.
Okay, so the PFI wasn't estimated. The thing that we maybe there were, let me just, so the PFI is the final score, which we were determining if it was greater than 1, it was high risk. And that score, that we get to that score with the normalized peak force and the hand activity level. The hand activity level we measured from each person through the video, and then the normalized peak force is the component that we arrived at via consensus of the researchers. So perhaps that's what you're getting at. And we had a method that we used for that where we each watched the videos individually and we scored the MPFs for the different task exertion forces based on our observation. And if they didn't all match, then we would if they were off by 1, we would average them together. And if they were off by more than 1, we would have a conversation and come to a consensus together. So I hope that answers that question.
Okay, any plans for a qualitative interview study of janitors to identify potential solutions?
Yeah, that's great. So not like an add-on to what's already been done, but part of the bigger study that I didn't really go into at all is a qualitative study that the LOHP, Labor and Occupational Health Program, led by Laura Stock, they did something like that, that was part of this study earlier on in the protocol. And so the results of that will be part of the bigger report that I mentioned that'll be out in the next few months. So yes, you'll be able to find that shortly.
Thanks, Melissa. Okay, we're down to the last minute. I have some closing remarks. I do have several people asking if they can get a hold of a copy of the PowerPoint. As I mentioned earlier, it is recorded and you can get it via YouTube. But as far as the PowerPoint goes, you can request a PowerPoint at coehce@berkeley.edu. That's coehce@berkeley.edu. So feel free to reach out to that address and request a copy of this excellent presentation. You can learn more about and register for our upcoming events at coeh.berkeley.edu. And you can also subscribe to our YouTube channel, where you'll find recordings of previous webinars and other events. If you logged in today with the registration email, you will receive a link to an evaluation form that will qualify you for a certificate of completion worth 1 CE contact hour. If you have any questions for us here at COEH Northern California, you can drop us a line at coehce@berkeley.edu. That's coehce@berkeley.edu. A big thank you to you all for attending today. Great attendance, great questions. If I didn't get your question, I'm sorry, we did run out of time, but you feel free to send your questions directly to Melissa. Her questions, or her email, contact information is available in the PowerPoint, and she's easy to find online. So thank you all for being here. Thank you, Melissa, for an excellent presentation. And we'll see you all next episode. Okay. Bye, all.